Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for being part of our community. My name is Jason Cohen, and I'll be your host for today. I'm also joined by my co-hosts, Valen Kolika and Ashley Martin. A few reminders before we start. If you have issues viewing the stream at any time during the presentation and are using the web browser version of Teams, please refresh your browser. If you're using the desktop app of Teams, please exit and rejoin. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared publicly. We will post the recordings on our community at aka.ms/securitywebinars. Closed captions in several languages are available during the live broadcast. You can enable them by clicking on the CC button located at the lower right corner of your screen. Feel free to ask questions at any time by typing them in the live event Q&A window by clicking on the Ask a Question button. Be aware that any questions you post will be publicly visible. However, if you prefer, you can post your question anonymously by checking the box right below where you enter it. We often get many questions on these webinars, and we will do our best to respond to all of them in real time. In the event if the answer was not provided, or if you may have additional questions post this event, please don't hesitate to raise them on our Azure Security Center forum at aka.ms/ASC community. We love to hear your feedback on how we can improve these webinars. You can do so at aka.ms/securitywebinar feedback. And by the way, all the links that I'm announcing will be shared with you on the chat or the live event Q&A window. I would also like to invite you to join our public community by visiting aka.ms/securitycommunity. That's the best way to ensure you don't miss any future webinars or major announcements. On our community, you can speak directly to our engineering teams that create our security products. You'll be able to influence our product designs and get early access to changes by doing things like participating in private previews at aka.ms/prsetcom, request features, give feedback, review our product roadmaps, register for events, or join webinars like this. We believe that the best way to improve our products is by removing any barriers between you and the people that create them. So we hope you'll join us. In today's session, Safeena Lapakshi and Ajeet Prakash will take us through Azure Defender for SQL. Safeena is a senior program manager with the Azure Security Center team, while Ajeet is a senior program manager with the Microsoft Threat Intelligence team. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to them. Safeena, Ajeet, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jason. Can you see my screen? Just want to confirm.
Yes.
Awesome. All right, so for today's agenda, it's going to be a packed one with a lot of information. So please do not hesitate to put your questions in the chat. We will be answering them throughout the session. So starting off, we are going to cover these topics today. To start with, we will briefly discuss about what's the motivation for attackers behind a SQL attack. And I'll walk you through some recommendations that gets generated due to the misconfigurations that you have in your environment, and what are the procedures you can follow to remediate them. We will also discuss about how Azure Defender detects anomalous activities with advanced threat protection, like how Azure Security Center detects threats. Finally, this is actually a great session for us, specifically because we are showcasing a better together story here. Azure Security Center is an extremely valuable service, and in this session, you will also get to learn how you can use Azure Sentinel and how you can take advantage of the great work that Security Center and Azure Defender is doing to pull that information into Azure Sentinel and then investigate the alert further. So without further delay, let's start with it. I want to take you back to the famous Volgar campaign from the last year that was reported by Gordy Cure. If you have read about this attack, you will agree that this was very well planned, very noisy as well. It was originated in more than 120 IP addresses. Some of them were short-lived, but some of the IPs were active for over 3 months. So basically, the campaign targeted Windows machines running SQL servers, which were internet-facing. So the attack began with SQL Server brute force attempts, and once the attacker breaks in, a series of configuration changes were performed there, to the database in order to allow the command execution. So when I read about this attack, I realized SQL wasn't a target, but they use SQL as a tool to create crypto mining network. So when they were successfully able to brute force the attack, they used XP command shell, went to the OS layer and installed the crypto miner, and then they were able to get into the SQL servers and make the damage. So this was, the volume of the attack was really huge, and there was a huge news about this attack. Again, this is just one of the example. We hear many such campaigns, which is why it is highly recommended to not expose database servers to the internet. Before I even start talking about defending our solutions, it is also important to understand what is the motivation for the attackers, and which is why I have this example of an environment where we have a web application here going through application gateway to some of the SQL servers. There are some SQL servers in the cloud. There are some SQL servers, native SQL servers, and some of the servers are on virtual machines as well. So when you think of SQL Server, the first thing comes to the mind to anybody, I'm sure, is the data, right? Protecting the data is very important, and SQL data, to be specific, is the crown jewel of the modern time. We hear in the news almost every day about data breaches, so protecting the data is super important. The second very important thing that a lot of people miss is the compute, that is the SQL that is running upon. So SQL has a lot of powers about compute. It can communicate to internet. It can communicate with a lot of other machines, and sometimes it can act as a central structure as well, which means you may have many machines communicating to the same SQL server. So it's definitely a great place for lateral movement, and what we see, a lot of attackers try to breach SQL servers with brute force attack, and then after they succeed, they are using SQL Server ability to run the shell scripts and then install something on the machine, and it can be a crypto miner or ransomware. Having this protected is super important. And some of the common threats that we see day in and day out are these. They can try to attack, through web application using SQL injection. You're still infecting the data. So SQL injection here is one of the most important, web application security issues on the internet, right? This is used to attack data-driven applications, and attackers take advantage of application vulnerabilities in order to inject malicious SQL statements, into the application entry fields as well, and then they breach and then modify the data within the database. That's one way to attack. Another way to attack is using, is to brute force. So if you have direct access to the SQL server, say, for example, if it is open to internet, or if the attacker is able to get into the internal network and trying to touch the SQL server, it can try to brute force it and then can get into the infrastructure. And not many people know that a lot of SQL attacks can start in a breached machine or breached identity as well. You will notice in this webinar how Azure Defender for SQL protects and alerts about these things. So moving on, the moment you enable Azure Defender for SQL, we provide you detections on all of these attacks we spoke about: SQL injection attack detection, brute force attack detection, threat intelligence-based detection, which I will go through more deeply in the upcoming slides. But we also provide vulnerability assessments for you in order to help you avoid those attacks, and you can try to mitigate those attacks on priority as soon as possible. So, as a best practice guidance, we recommend customers to disable XP command shell. Even in the Volgar campaign that we spoke about, XP command shell was used in order to make the attack or reach the data successfully. So, this is a top recommendation, one of the top recommendations we recommend. And this command will basically allow you to run a shell from your SQL server, which does the damage in the magnitude larger. We also suggest to disable SA login recommendation. In fact, these are some of many security checks that Azure Defender looks for in your environment and reports it. During my demo, I will show you some of these recommendations as well, and we will speak more about it in the upcoming slides. So before anything else, it's important that you understand Azure Defender for SQL is built out of two parts, advanced threat protection and vulnerability assessment. So talking about advanced threat protection, we provide a new layer. It provides you a new layer of security that detects anomalous activities, which could be indicating unusual or even potential harmful attempts to access or exploit your database. And it also enables customers to respond to those potential threats. You might receive an alert on suspicious database activity, potential vulnerabilities, or SQL injection attacks if it's happening in your environment, and then you can act upon it before it damages further. And then we have vulnerability assessment that provides you visibility into your security state, which helps you kind of harden the environment. To start with, we help you remediate potential database vulnerabilities before even, an attack was successfully occurred in your environment. You can use the recommendations that we provide in the Security Center dashboard, use it to proactively improve your database security. And then, vulnerability assessment again is supported in several flavors, which I will speak about it in the upcoming slides. To give you a background, it supports Azure SQL Database, SQL Managed Instance, SQL Analytics, and then databases in Azure SQL Database, and so on. I'll speak about it in the upcoming slides. But before that, I wanted to give you an overview of how we detect the threats. What are the mechanisms that we use? I'm sure this slide may be most familiar to you, but it's really important to understand and highlight in this webinar to start with. So Microsoft security researchers are constantly looking out for threats. And because of our global presence that we have in cloud as well as in on-premise, we have access to expensive set of telemetry. So Security Center uses advanced threat analytics, like we saw in the last slides, which go far beyond signature-based approach. It uses integrated threat intelligence. We have telemetry flows that flows in from multiple sources like Azure, M365, Microsoft Security Response Center, and many more, right? So Security Center uses this information to alert you to threats from known bad actors. And then we have behavioral analytics is a technique that is used by Security Center that analyzes and compares the data, to a collection of known patterns and then alerts you upon it. And then Security Center also has anomaly detection. It uses anomaly detection in order to identify threats. And then we have machine learning in the backend that is applied in order to determine if that's a normal activity from your deployments, and then it rules out and then it generates the rules to define the conditions that could probably represent a security event. And the most important and the interesting aspect or feature that we have in the security alerts is Fusion. Fusion is a technology that combines events and alerts from across the kill chain, to map the attack timeline. So you will have alerts correlated, different alerts correlated and put together so that the alerts are combined and presented to you in a defined manner so that you can view all the alerts in one page. So Azure Defender for SQL Anywhere. We've been running SQL Anywhere campaign for a while. So what I want to highlight in this slide is Azure Defender for SQL includes two Azure Defender plans that extends Azure Security Center's data security package so that we secure your databases and their data wherever they are located. So you have Azure Defender for SQL Database servers that protects SQL Database Managed Instance, dedicated SQL pool in Synapse Analysis, and we recently had released Azure, database for MySQL, MariaDB, and PostgreSQL as well. Also, if you have hybrid environments, and of course you want to protect your SQL servers as well, right? So that's where the Azure Defender for SQL servers on machines comes into picture, which kind of covers, actually extends the protection for your native SQL servers to fully support hybrid environments. So if you have SQL servers on virtual machine, you can onboard it with the help of OMS agent. You have on-premise SQL servers. You can use Azure Arc as well, in order to onboard that SQL server. And a SQL server, be it running on AWS or any other cloud for that matter, you have the opportunity to protect them with the help of Azure Defender for SQL. And I'll take you to the portal in a second, but just to give you an overview, the moment you enable for going to the pricing and settings and going to the Azure Defender plans, the moment you enable these plans, you will have the protection for Azure Defender for SQL. So let's imagine you have enabled Azure Defender for SQL bundle. Now you can view recommendations for your SQL servers that you're monitoring in a centralized view in the security center under recommendations page, which I'll show you in a second, so that you can understand the context of the entire environment security posture. Another way is resource level focused. You could navigate to a specific SQL server that you're monitoring, and you can review the recommendations and alerts from that specific resource as well. Okay. So moving on to remediate misconfigurations with vulnerability assessments. SQL vulnerability assessment has three main milestones that you should address in order to improve your SQL security posture. The first one is deployment, which basically means that you need to, of course, enable Azure Defender for SQL, and then you need to configure vulnerability assessment. Right. I want to highlight an important point here that customers realize it later during the deployment. Vulnerability assessment for past services requires storage accounts. So we have a dependency here. Customers go on to deploy it, and then they realize, oh, I haven't thought of which storage account I want to provide here. And then I've seen this often during my interaction with the customers. And I want to share in the roadmap, we're working on removing the dependency. But today, to store the scan results, you must provide a storage account that at the logical SQL server level, you have within the Azure. But if I talk about SQL IaaS, though, the SQL server, for example, SQL server that's hosted inside or outside of Azure, we are providing storage less approach. So we removed the dependency we have with the storage account there. So I recommend customers to have one storage account or different storage accounts according to their sensitivity of their resources. But yeah, that's one of the points that I wanted to highlight. So if, for example, you're trying to deploy a SQL Server, IaaS is pretty straightforward. Just enable Azure Defender for SQL bundle, deploy the solution within the workspace, install the OMS or MMA agent, or you can even use Azure Arc, and then you will start receiving the scan results. The scan results are exposed to Azure Resource Graph, and the results are shown in Azure Security Center dashboard through a dedicated API and also at the resource level as well. So when you finish the deploy milestone, you move on to the next one, which is prioritize. Prioritize basically means that now you have the scan results. The goal now here is to understand most important misconfigurations and critical vulnerabilities that you must address, right? I'll show each of these phases in the in my demo, but just to understand. Now, when you are done prioritizing, you will move on to the next step, which is the remediation. And the goal here is to understand how you remediate. What is the business impact? What is the security impact? What are the permissions that are required? Who should do the remediation and how to do it and so on, right? And talking about remediation, we always update our recommendations and abilities along the way. If something changes, you will be notified by Security Center, and your secure score will be impacted accordingly. We have introduced several new recommendations as well, which we will discuss at the end. As I said, deploy is the first step. First step is to have plug and play to receive the scan results. And all of these in actually less than 3 clicks. The more you scan, the more you will be secure. That's the theory behind it, because we will discover new and potential misconfigurations, and we will display that in the Azure Security Center recommendations pane. So with one click, you can enable Azure Defender for all the databases, like how we noticed in the earlier screenshot. And then if the one important thing I want to highlight is for enabling or even managing Azure Defender settings, you require permissions. You will have to be a SQL security manager role or one of the database or server admin roles in order to be able to do it. And second step is to prioritize. We want to make every finding understandable for any persona within your organization. So regardless if you're a security architect, security administrator, DBA, resource owner, application owner, we want to give you the ability and the tools that will help you to understand what are the most critical misconfigurations you must address. And then we give you ability to sort the recommendations by severity, by benchmark, which I'll show you in a minute. You can also export the scan results, and you can see the history as well. And the third and final and most important step is to remediate. We want to allow any type of organizations, small, medium, large, to remediate the findings on their SQL states. We give you remediation scripts. You can apply baseline so that you apply the policy guardrails right in the beginning. You can disable a specific rule if you think it's not applicable for you. We will deep dive into more of these options in the demo, but you can also disable a specific rule, which I'll show you in my example. So let's move on to the demo section before we speak about the Better Together story. So taking you to my Azure portal. So first of all, navigating to the Security Center. Once you navigate to the Security Center, you click on the pricing and settings and choose the subscription that you want to enable Azure Defender for SQL, and you turn on the toggle button, say, for example, this one. Under the Azure Defender plans, we have a number of packages that we have for Azure Defender for SQL, Azure SQL databases, SQL Server on machines, open source relational databases on or off. Okay. So one thing I want to emphasize here before I move on to the next topic is you have two ways to enable Azure Defender for SQL. Either you can enable at the subscription level, or alternatively, you can go to a specific SQL server and enable it at the resource level as well. But enabling at the subscription level is what we recommend. And also you can enable it through the portal with just one click, or programmatically very easily using REST APIs, CLI, PowerShell, or even through Azure policies, which I see customers using it very often. So once you have enabled Azure Defender for SQL, I will navigate to the recommendations page. If you want to ensure that you have correctly configured SQL vulnerability assessment on your SQL databases, or even managed instances, for example, you can view a security control called Remediate Security Configurations, in which you will have recommendations like vulnerability assessment should be enabled on your SQL Server, and vulnerability assessment should be enabled on your SQL managed instances. Okay, and if you notice, there is an icon here next to each of these recommendations, which is, you have a way to quick fix these recommendations as well. Okay, that's what this icon is telling you. I'm a huge fan of quick fix. It saves time, plus we make sure we expose the logic as well we are using in order to quick fix any recommendation. But just for these two recommendations, my personal advice is to go with a different approach instead of quick fixing, and I'll tell you why. Okay, let's take an example of vulnerability assessment should be enabled on your SQL Server recommendation. So basically what quick fix does is it creates a storage account on each resource you have, seeing here as unhealthy. If you click on it and then click on fix, I don't have permissions for the subscription, so the fix is not highlighted, but otherwise the fix would be highlighted, and then you'll be able to fix it. But the problem here is, for example, you have 5 resources here, which means you're basically going to create 5 or more storage accounts. So which is not the best approach I would recommend here. My recommendation here is to go on per subscription or per region, and create a single storage account and associate it to all the other SQL servers you have within your applications that are stored probably in the same region or in the same subscription, so that you can reduce automatically creation of the amount of storage accounts that you will have to create when you enable vulnerability assessment. So we have a similar recommendation for the SQL managed instances as well, and we offer quick fix experience here as well. And again, I advise you to follow the same guideline. Of course,
Safeena, sorry to cut you off. Could you zoom in just a little? We have a request from the attendees that it's hard for them to see.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Hope this is okay.
Yes, thank you. Much better.
Thank you. So I was saying we have a similar recommendation for SQL managed instances as well. And I was talking about storage account. So you can have a storage account that can be configured for a SQL managed instance, and for SQL Server database as well. So the resource type here is not unique to the storage account you have. Like, for example, you can have multiple flavors associated within the same storage account. That is never a problem. Okay. Let's say that you have configured the SQL vulnerability assessment, then you will be presented with two new recommendations that will be tied to the previous one, which is SQL database should have vulnerability findings resolved. And if you have SQL servers on machines, then you will have one of these recommendations saying SQL servers on machines should have vulnerability finding resolved. So let's take this as an example. By the way, if you have noticed in this black view, not sure if you can, but there is a little icon here that talks about preview. Okay, this particular recommendation, SQL servers on machines should have vulnerability findings, is in preview right now, which means this recommendation will not affect your secure score until it goes to GA. So once it goes to GA, probably next month that we are releasing that recommendation, this recommendation is going to be generally available, and then the recommendation will start to impact your secure score. So now, how do I remediate this? So you have actually three ways to remediate your misconfigurations and vulnerabilities here. The first thing here is using the tile here at the top that we recently added for each of these recommendations. It gives you an overview of where you are in your environment. So here I have top 3 servers with most findings, right? And of course, you can click on each of them to understand what are the findings, to automatically see all the databases that are actually affected. And you can see under the healthy databases, if you have remediated all of the misconfigurations, you can also see a pivot here that will show you all the misconfigurations on how many databases this misconfiguration is being applied to, and also from which benchmark it's coming from, and so on, right? I do have an option to filter the benchmarks here further. If my organization is only worried about CIS benchmark, I have an option to filter and look at the security checks or findings from here. Going back. So in the tile, you will also see databases with most findings, right? So instead of just seeing the databases associated with the server, you can see this as well. So clicking on which, for example, let's take one of the high recommendations, say database communication using TDS should be protected. When I click on this, you will notice information of how to query to see the result. So this is the query that is used in the backend to see the result. You will notice information about the query, and you will have the remediation option as well. I mean, if there is a remediation script available for this rule, we would publish it right here. Like, for example, I know, unfortunately, I don't have that example to show here in my subscription, but for SA logins, to disable SA login, we do give you a script in order to disable the SA logins. So things like those are available for some of these recommendations or security checks that we show up here. And we have the most important thing is baseline that I want to cover today. We will touch base on the baseline in a while. So this is the first way to remediate and see information of misconfigurations, in order to prioritize, and then you can remember the phases. If you go back to my slides, if you remember the phases, you have deploy, prioritize, and remediate, right? Now, going back to the SQL servers recommendation, let's talk about prioritizing. We can prioritize basically the servers and the database that you want to focus according to one of the findings that is being shown here, right? So under the unhealthy resources, you have healthy resources and not applicable resources. So each resource will be represented here under the unhealthy resources. Each resource will be represented here with a different icon depending on how you have hosted the SQL server and depending on what flavors of SQL you're using. Though here in my example, I just have VMs hosted inside Azure, so it's representing it with the VM icon. But if you had a SQL server on machine hosted outside of Azure or connected, using an OMS or MMA agent, you will notice a different icon. Similarly, you will have a different icon for machines connected through Azure Arc. Basically, you will see Azure Arc icon. Scrolling down further, you have security checks here. This is another pivot that we show. This gives you visibility on all the recommendations we found on all the affected resources here at the top. So here we are grouping them according to the databases. That are actually, affected by that recommendation. You can click on one of the security check, and you can see what the description is, what is the impact, what is the query, that you can use to run, to find out the misconfiguration. We expose the query here, basically mainly for the customers who needs to address some compliance issues. They might want to give the query that is being used by the tool to the auditors, for example, so that they understand upfront the CIS or FedRAMP or any other benchmark you can think about. So scrolling down further, you will see more information from which benchmark it's coming from and what are the affected resources. You can click on one of the unhealthy resources, which will further take you to another blade to investigate it further, right? Before we deep dive into the vulnerability assessment, I want to show you one other cool thing, which is dismiss resources here. Say, for example, if I've accepted the risk, or if this is how, if due to the business impact or whatever, right? If I have dismissed a particular resource, you'll be able to see it here in the dismiss databases. We have one other capability, which is disable rule. Capability here, you can disable resources to be not impacted to your secure score and to exclude from this. When I click on disable rule, you can choose one of your subscription and say what parameters you want to disable, what IDs, and then choose the severity and then the subscription and benchmark. And then once you have clicked on disable rule, you'll be able to see it under the dismiss database section. This is a feature of Azure Security Center, not specifically for the SQL Server, but you can take benefit of it as well. Okay. I want to talk about baseline for a minute, which is the most important part of the session today. Let's take, for example, on this particular, let's take the same recommendation as an example, and I click on the database that has most findings, right? So I'll take any of the security finding as an example, okay? And this is the baseline. So, I was actually, I wanted to show you SA login should be disabled. That's because that's one of the most popular vulnerability that is being used by malicious users and attackers to brute force, right? But since I don't have that in my subscription, I'm showing up this, but it's the same rule that applies. You will be presented with the command at the remediation part. You can copy this command and run here at the remediation part. You can copy this command if there was a command here, and you can run it with the tool of your choice, like SQL Server Management Studio or ADO and so on. And then at the place where you are seeing the query and the results here, you'll have two buttons: add all the results to the baseline, remove all from the baseline. What the baseline here means is when you enable the baseline, basically what you ask SQL vulnerability assessment is you are basically saying the tool that you accept that misconfiguration. It probably might be a part of your business application need, as long as the result doesn't change, you ask SQL vulnerability assessment to consider it as healthy. And that's the important of the baseline. You can either add it or you can either remove it and so on. So that was about recommendations. Very quickly, under the security alerts, once you have Azure Defender for SQL enabled, if your environment will always be on watch, checking for bad actors. So for example, say you missed remediating a particular recommendation. Let's take an example of open ports to the SQL database server. Let's imagine due to the open ports, a brute force attack was attempted. Azure Defender will identify that and report the brute force attack, like this example, right? When I click on the suspected brute force attempt and I could click on view full details, you will notice clear description of what this alert is all about, what are the affected resources, which subscription it is in, and also in which cybersecurity kill chain phase the attack is in. Is it in the pre-attack or credential access or lateral movement and so on? And under the related entities, you will also see the IP address that the attack is coming from. Not to miss, don't forget to check the Take Action tab. Here you will see the overview of recommendations that we already highlighted to you, which which, for example, if you miss taking care of it, that's why the attack was possible. So now that I have this attack, Security Center has reported it for me. How do I investigate this further? How do I make sure that I have the good investigation process and I take care of this attack very well? Here, I want to invite you, my friend Ajeet, to teach us through the investigation process using Azure Sentinel.
Thank you, Safeena. I'll go ahead and quickly share my screen. And can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. So in the last 35-40 minutes, Safeena gave a lot of great information about Azure Defender for SQL and all its powerful capabilities. However, when it comes to investigation and hunting and the way the threat landscape continues to increase in both complexity and the kind of sophistication of attacks that we see today, and if we want to give the defenders a solid chance to fight against this, we need a better integration between various security products, so as they can see the signals across different products in an easy way. We need coordinated work. We need to bring every asset that we have to bear on this problem. Basically, we need to be better together. I'm going to touch a little bit today about how Azure Sentinel as a product integrates with the Defender for SQL. And together, they can be a great investment for a company if they are really serious about defending against attacks against their SQL server. So to continue in business today, every organization needs to defend itself from various security attacks. We have been talking about securing Azure SQL. However, in the big picture, if you think about it, SQL security is just one part of the puzzle for an organization. At the heart of every security operation is data. Data in the form of logs is how we security people see across our environment, across our networks, applications, and endpoints. And Azure Sentinel is a SIM product. And a SIM is kind of a key tool for processing this information, this data at scale, and analyzing it for security issues. The whole idea of Azure Sentinel, or as I say, the core idea of Azure Sentinel is that relevant data regarding an enterprise security is produced in multiple location and logs, and being able to analyze all of that data, whether it is coming from network, whether it's coming from endpoints, whether it's coming from applications, from a single point makes it easier for our security analysts to identify attacks and see patterns that are out of ordinary. We talked about the importance of like having data. Hey, why we should have all our data in Azure Sentinel? Why should we see the alerts in Azure Sentinel? And but the question still remains for a lot of people is this involves investments of hundreds of thousands of dollars for big organization. Do we have that much amount of value? Do we need all of that data in one place? So that's a question, and that's a great question for that we need to answer and we need to be fundamentally clear about. So, I mean, from a security perspective, we need data for a couple of different reasons. And the most important being understanding the threat. There are a couple of big points that I want to cover on this slide, why it is important for us. And the deal is, the way I think about it is, no security tool can detect 100% of the attack. AV does not have all the signature to detect malware. Application firewall or network firewall is not going to protect you from all the attacks. We talked in the last 30-40 minutes about Azure Defender for SQL. But to be honest, I don't think we can claim that it can protect you from 100% of all the SQL attacks. Basically, there is no silver bullet. You need to keep hunting and trying to detect bad stuff on your network continuously, iteratively. Hunting teaches us how to find data, build hypothesis, understand what is needed to verify that hypothesis, check if we have that data in our environment or not. And even if we have the data, how do we distinguish between normal and not normal? So the data that we have, if we have people in your organization who are continuously looking to get a better picture of your network, they are continuously looking to find different anomalies, they're continuously looking to find the various detection gaps, then only your organization will be in a safe place. No security product can claim that they can detect and prevent 100% from the attacks that are happening today. And the security engineers who do regular hunts are better trained to respond and triage during an actual incident. So that's why one reason why we need data. The other one that is very important, and I want to underline here, is the purpose. The entire purpose of having data and doing these threat hunts is to reduce the time between a breach and its discovery. Shortening that time can make the difference between spending a few $1,000s on remediation to millions to deal with a full-on compromise. By finding compromises as early as possible, we can move malicious activity from your system. We can remove malicious activity from our systems and networks before attackers can accomplish their objectives. By detecting these adversaries early in the intrusion cycle, we reduce a lot of effort to scope and remediate. And then that kind of reduces a big amount of cost that is involved in an actual compromise. Forget about the loss of reputation and loss of data and other things. One other good reason for having data from multiple sources at one place is that it can help us understand the scope and breadth of an attack. When we get an alert, you want to understand everything about it to make a determination about what are the next steps that we need to take. When was my organization attacked? What resources were impacted? Who is attacking me? Was there any data exfiltration? So, alerts are great, but what you need is to understand the complete scope of the attack. And Safeena was talking about the SQL brute force attempts. To understand what accounts were targeted, we probably would have to look at the SQL audit or error logs. That will give us an idea. Safeena talked about the SA account compromise. So suppose it was an SA account compromise which eventually led up to a successful login followed by account being used to enable the XP command shell. Now, once they go ahead and get the shell, I mean, XP command shell kind of is a stored procedure, which is a very favorite for attackers because it kind of gives them the ability to invoke a Windows command shell from the Microsoft SQL Server. So once they get the shell, they can try a variety of things. They can go ahead and disable AV. They can go ahead and modify your ACLs on your files and folders or registry keys. They can go ahead and create some scheduled task for persistence. There's a lot of things that can happen here. So we talked about audit or error logs from SQL that can give you an idea about, hey, what accounts are impacted. But if you have like, say from an Azure VM, which has a SQL hosted, probably if you have the process creation data, you will be able to answer a lot of these questions about modifying of permissions, disabling of AV, creation of scheduled tasks, and things like that. So that's what I'm trying to say is like, if you want to understand the complete scope of an incident, you need data from multiple places. So also, one last point, and I will quickly cover that is, I mean, if we have more data, it's easier for the new technologies, the security engines, to do a better anomaly detection, the machine learning analysis, the behavioral analysis, so that they can come up with compound detections that are of higher fidelity. Compound detections kind of identify hard to detect attacks with high precision. They go ahead and combine alerts and audit events from multiple services, mapping them to stages in the kill chain and zeroing down to the likely attacker so that you do not get tons of alert, but the ones that you get are better fidelity ones. So this is kind of the foundational reason of how we think about Azure Sentinel and why we want all the data to come into it. Let's go a little bit into the operational details of how Azure Sentinel and Azure Defender for SQL can work together. So let me go, yeah. So when it comes to data in Azure Sentinel, particularly related to SQL, we have a concept in Sentinel called data connectors. Data connectors are used in Sentinel to gather data from a variety of sources, and that are then stored in the log analytics workspace. The product makes collecting data as easy as a couple of mouse clicks. Organizations today don't just have Microsoft devices on their network. They also have third-party devices like Cisco routers, Palo Alto firewalls, and Sentinel has connectors for all of them. Some customers will also be multi-cloud, and Sentinel has connectors for multi-cloud environment as well. Currently, the product has more than 100 connectors that allows you to get security-focused logs into Azure Sentinel. However, for our purpose, we need to focus on two, like the two important one when it comes to SQL. First is the Azure Defender connector. I have a screenshot here for you. So this connector allows you to stream your security alerts from Azure Defender into Azure Sentinel, the most important one. If we go on to the next one, the second thing that is more important for us is the Azure SQL Database connector. One is the Azure Defender connector that pipes in the alerts from Azure Defender for SQL into Azure Sentinel. The other one is the Azure SQL Database connector. So this connector lets you stream your Azure Database diagnostic logs into Azure Sentinel, allowing you to continuously monitor activity in your SQL instances. So mostly SQL security audit events is probably the most important one that is going to be important for us. Now that we know what data we need, in the interest of time, let's go ahead and dive quickly into what we can do in Azure Sentinel. So let's go ahead and turn on my demo environment. And so this is the kind of the Azure Sentinel overview. And you have, if you go to data connectors, we have a bunch of different data connectors. You can type SQL and you will get Azure SQL databases. Similarly, we also have the Azure Defender connector there. So let's go ahead and try to see some incidents, like how it will show up in if we go ahead and look in the incidents pane. So we go ahead in the incidents pane and you see like there are two incidents that I see here. I mean, I have already filtered it for you, but I mean, there are various products. I have narrowed it down to Azure Defender. Went ahead and selected only active alerts, high severity ones. So we go ahead and we go ahead and select like say a SQL injection. Let's go ahead and understand the SQL injection one. Okay, so here we go ahead and see the alert that is surfaced here. And looking at it, it seems like there is an IP address that is involved. There's a security DB that is involved. So and there is a creation time that is there. So these are some interesting things that we need to look into. So let's go ahead and do an investigate on that one. And it brings us to a graphical interface where it is easier for a lot of people to understand what's going on. If you click on these, like it gives you more details about potential SQL injections, what are the different things involved here, and in a graphical way. Let's also, like this is the SQL DB is the one that was attacked, but let's go and find out more about it in the events section here. So when we go to the event section here, yeah, it brings us to the log analytics console where we have where we see the alert that is there. So if you look at the alerts, it gives us an idea about what's happening here. We can go ahead and expand the extended properties. It will give you the IP address that was involved. It will give you the principal name, the login which was there. What is the server that is impacted? It is also giving you the vulnerable statement. When we say SQL injection, what was happening here? It gives you an idea about that part as well. So let me go to this one where I have already got some of the queries pre-populated for you. So once we find a little bit about what's going on here in the Azure Sentinel, what we can do is we can we can go ahead and pivot from some of these different items. For example, we had an IP address there, so we can go ahead and check for these IP addresses in the various public threat intelligence feed. Azure SQL already matches them based and it raises alert. But if you want to go and try other feeds as well, you can go ahead and do that here in Azure Sentinel, like the emerging threat feeds that is there. We can go ahead and check against that. Then there is like say threat intelligence indicators that we have onboarded, like various commercial ones. You can go ahead and check there as well. So these are the different things that you can go ahead and quickly check in Sentinel. For example, if you look at this one, this has yeah, I mean, it also has a little bit of information about, hey, this is just a botnet. It's not a targeted attack that's happening here. If you can look at this alert information, this also will go ahead and tell us that this is some kind of a commodity-based malware or attack, and it's more opportunistic in nature. So that is one part. The other important pivot point for us was the time that was there when we went ahead and the attack was happening. So we saw like one command of the SQL injection that was happening. But if we actually went ahead and sorted with time, we could see there's a lot of other things that is going on here, which kinds of gives us a complete picture of what's actually happening versus just an alert that is there. So in the interest of time, I'll go quickly and say like this is like if we have data in Azure Sentinel coming from different products, we can make a better picture of what's actually going on. And then the deal is like we can also like this is the something while we're investigating every day we can also go ahead and do like hunting in Azure Sentinel. We already have a hunting pane where you can use your most often repeated queries. You can look for probably like say these are all the events related to failed logins that's going on here. So you could probably go ahead and summarize that based on the IP addresses. And that will give you an idea about, hey, what's happening here? Like, which are the ones that are like the most noisy that we need to look at. Similarly, I mean, we could look for suspicious stored procedures and stuff. So this way, like you can go ahead and build from what is surfaced by Azure SQL, and then go ahead and get the complete picture, the complete scope of the attack from Azure Sentinel, about what's going on there in your organization as far as attacks are concerned. So I'll go ahead and quickly go back to my slide in the interest of time. So like now we will go ahead and, yep. Yeah. So we also have the other good thing about Azure Sentinel is like a lot of organizations face the problem that they do not have enough cybersecurity experts. So Sentinel comes with a lot of pre-built dashboards for many data sources, hunting, queries, etc. So this helps the security folks to be productive right away. We also have an open source community repository in GitHub loaded with hundreds of queries that we are adding every day. We are also building Azure Sentinel SQL solution that is currently on the screen, so that it's easier for people to go ahead and find out the various attacks that are happening right now. So there are numerous ways, if you know, like that SQL attacks can be detected. The way the security landscape is changing every day, it's not always possible to detect attack with a single query. So it's important for us to develop diverse detection and hunting queries using numerous novel approaches to provide the best possible visibility of SQL attack. And so if you think about all of it, it definitely makes sense when we have security products working better together, not only to find the alerts, but the complete scope of the attack. I'll quickly go ahead and give the slide to Safeena so that she can close it out as far as Azure Defender for SQL is concerned. But I hope it made a little bit clearer why when we are together as a security product, we are better.
Thank you so much, Ajeet.
Great.
Okay. So just my closing statement is just turn on Azure Defender for SQL and take benefit of these amazing features. We are leaving you at the end of the slide. We are leaving you with some important links to learn more about the features that we spoke about. And thank you so much for taking time to attend this session. I hope it was helpful and you're ready to investigate the attacks. Over to you, Jason.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Safeena and Ajeet, for being our guests today and for an excellent presentation. And thank you to the rest of the team who helped answer questions. At the same time, I would like to remind the listeners that the best way to ensure you don't miss any future webinars or major announcements is to visit our landing page at aka.ms/securitycommunity. And while there, you'll find easy ways to navigate and find the resources and learning content relevant to our security products and their communities. A good start would be browsing our bite-sized product videos, ninja trainings, recordings of past webinars, GitHub communities, and more. We love to hear your feedback on how we can improve these webinars. Please take a minute submitting your webinar feedback at aka.ms/security webinar feedback. Thank you and see you next time. Goodbye.